But we begin the show. We pick up with the Final Four. March Madness is coming to a close. And David, I'm going to play for us just a little bit of audio from our show a few weeks ago. A couple of really good calls were made.
By who? You?
By both of us. Yes, by both of us.
Take?
Yeah, you had one good take, and we're gonna get to that. But right here, just a little bit of celebratory patting on the back of some good calls we made about the tournament. The deck is stacked way against the Blue Devils this year, disproportionately stacked. It's not fair. Zion's you got to maximize Zion's time in this tournament. If you're the selection committee, you got to maximize RJ Barrett's time. You got to maximize Duke. You got to maximize Coach K. And that's why I'm not going with Duke. Michigan State's the best number 2. They've only lost one game all year to a ranked team, and that was their first game of the entire season versus Kansas. Michigan State won the Big Ten, won it outright. Tom Izzo, legendary head coach. They could easily be a number 1. Give me the Spartans in this game to pull the upset over the Dukies. I don't like Duke long-term. I think Duke is way too top-heavy. Think about DeMarcus Cousins and John Wall for a second. Think about teams in this tournament that have been crazy top-heavy. I don't think top-heavy teams do well in this thing. I think the teams that do well in this tournament are teams that are not top-heavy at all. Michigan State to the Final Four out of the East. Yeah, that was a really good call by me there. And, I mean, I got a lot of stuff wrong, and I'm going to play just a slight piece of audio of a bad call that I made just to sort of level things out. But honestly, when we think about Duke in this tournament, when we think about Michigan State, I didn't think Duke was going to beat Virginia Tech and then Michigan State and then somebody in the Final Four and then somebody in the final. From the very beginning of the tournament, before the tournament even began, I saw the East bracket, and I saw Duke. And I saw that their path was way, way too tough. And so to me, I didn't think Duke was going to win. So where were they going to lose? Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four, or Final? And I also saw Michigan State as the best number 2. Clearly should have been a number 1. And we're possibly going to talk about it if we have time. When you look at Michigan State, they lost to only the number 1 ranked team in the country in their very first game. This was a team that is perhaps better than Gonzaga, perhaps better than even Virginia. This was a team that was one of the best, strongest number 2s that we've had in a long time. No wonder ever since their first game, they've been crushing people. No wonder they beat Duke. And that's where we're going to start these good calls. And last week on Rapid Fire, this is where you have a really good call, David. Ooh. Last week on Rapid Fire, you asked us what upsets do we predict? What upsets do we have? Although I think UC Irvine in the South region, UC Irvine has a chance to beat Kansas State. That would be a 13 over a 4. If I had to pick a major upset, I would pick 13 UC Irvine over number 4 Kansas State.
Yeah, the one that I've been looking at is Murray State versus Marquette. I think Murray State that's a 5-12. Those games usually you have a decent Power 5 team versus someone that's a little bit on the outs, but always a really competitive team. I think that's what Murray State is this year. I could see them winning.
Yeah.
There we go. Basketball savants.
Right. Pretty good calls. And when my dad came onto the show as well, he highlighted Houston and Florida State when we asked him what are some teams not first or second seeds. So just for starters, a pretty good March Madness show from us. Another reason to listen to the cast every chance you get, because you're going to get a wealth of sports knowledge every single time. And this is another good March Madness period. Now, it did get off to a slower start. No 15s over 2s in the first round. No 14s over 3s either. All 4 number 3 seeds made the Sweet 16. That's very rare also. No major upsets this year. If the biggest upset of the entire March Madness is a 13 over a 4 or a 12 over a 5, that's a pretty tame March Madness. The madness, though, didn't really start until the second weekend, where we got an absolute slew of quality games in the Sweet 16 and especially the Elite 8. Let's start with Virginia and Purdue and Carson Edwards, who is going to be the player of the tournament. He's the only reason Purdue made it to the Elite Eight. For starters, I had Purdue out in the second round. I had them losing to Villanova. But Carson Edwards, he scored 42 points against Villanova. And in the game of the tournament versus Virginia in the Elite Eight, Carson Edwards had another 42 points. 42 points is unbelievable in college basketball, over a point a minute average. Putting up 40 in college basketball is like putting up 60 in the NBA. Carson Edwards did it twice against two really good teams. He hit a level in the Elite Eight versus Virginia that I'd rarely seen before out of any basketball players, college or pro. Carson Edwards, he went supernova. He shot 52% from three-point land. And he had somebody in his shirt the entire game. If you watch that game, you realize that Carson Edwards, he's being guarded pretty well. Virginia just didn't have an answer. It's not like he was running wild without any defense out there. Somebody was in his shirt. He tried to, Virginia tried to double team him.
Virginia is first in points allowed. Like, no one plays more consistent defense than Virginia. This was the most points Virginia allowed to an opponent all season.
Oh, yeah.
He just went crazy.
Yeah, they played great. And they played very well defensively against Carson Edwards. But he left earth.
Yeah.
I think if I had to describe the best way I can how good that performance was, supernova, inferno, I think Carson Edwards left earth. It looked like what Devin Booker looks like sometimes. It looks like what Klay Thompson looks like. Unbelievable. When they get to those levels, it's must-watch television. I was standing up, running around the room that I was in, watching that, because it was like street ball. It was like the slam dunk contest when pros run all over the court after somebody, because Carson Edwards kept making threes, kept making contested threes, kept banking in shots, kept putting people on ice skates. It was unbelievable. He vaulted himself into the lottery for sure. I don't think he was there before this tournament or even this game. He has NBA range. That's without a doubt. He has NBA quickness. Could he be a primary ball handler? He really needs to work on his passing. His passing numbers are low. But his ball handling is there, no question. And he was hitting threes at an unbelievable level all season long.
I think in the NBA draft, he's going to be, you just mentioned, I don't think he's going to be a lottery pick. I think he's going to be like Jalen Brunson or something. I think that's a really good comp. Like a senior, or not a senior, but an older point guard who is polished and can play NBA basketball right now, but doesn't have like huge upside, but he's going to be a contributor. I think that's what he's going to be.
Yeah, Jalen Brunson is having a pretty solid year for the Dallas Mavericks right now, and he's going to be overshadowed throughout his entire career by Luka Doncic. But I like that Jalen Brunson comparison because Jalen Brunson is a very quality guard early on, and Jalen Brunson could easily score, 10 to 20 points a night if given the minutes. Carson Edwards, he does look a little bit more explosive than Jalen Brunson, but Jalen Brunson looks like a little bit more solid of a ball handler and a play caller. But one thing here that I was impressed the most by Carson Edwards in this tournament was that his ball handling was as fast as his quickness. We see guys fall over their skis all the time. We see guys who are too quick for their handle all the time. But Carson was starting and stopping on a complete dime. Virginia tried to double team him, but they couldn't. And I don't think anybody in the NBA could double team him as well. Man, he was great. He was unbelievable. He should be the MVP of the tournament without a doubt. That being said, Virginia is the team that won that game. Virginia was the better team, but Purdue should have won that game. Purdue blew it in the final 2 minutes, especially on the final possession of overtime, where Carson Edwards did make a very costly turnover. When you talk about a complete team, Virginia has the edge there, but since Purdue had that one guy, and we both know basketball pretty well, if you have that one guy, your team should win. Carson Edwards was that one guy, but I'm really excited about the Cavaliers moving on to the Final Four.
Another thing just to note about this game, there was a collective 14 turnovers between these two teams.
Yeah.
Virginia does not, and they played in overtime as well. I mean, it's just unheard of.
Well, Purdue matched up very well.
Yeah.
Very, very well against Virginia. And yeah, that game's the game of the tournament without a doubt, even though we've had a lot of really other solid games. It's just that game, we saw a lot of fireworks and we saw a lot of great stuff on both sides. Great guard play by Ty Jerome and Kyle Guy of the Virginia Cavaliers as well. That's a team that I don't want to play if I'm Auburn. And let's move on to Auburn real quick. Knocking out my champion, North Carolina, beating Kentucky in the Elite Eight. And oh, by the way, they beat Kansas in the second round. Just on paper, no team has ever had a path with that many cornerstone basketball programs before. Like, which team, if we can remember, has had to play like 3 of the top 5 programs in this country in any given March Madness?
It sounds like a Final Four.
They've beaten Kansas. They've beaten North Carolina. They've beaten Kentucky. And they could beat Michigan State. And they have a good shot to beat Virginia. Like, on paper, this run is very, very, very impressive. In real life, it's also impressive. That being said, Kansas has had a down year, and North Carolina played their worst game of the entire season in the Sweet 16. But Auburn, what an incredible run. My best friend, Decker Branch, has them to the finals in our bracket group. Unbelievable. When that came out, I gave him a call, and I was pretty disrespectful calling him out for that. But he has them to the finals. Shout out. But seriously, when you want to talk about a team that's really ticking me off, I mean, look no further than Auburn. And they have the typical Cinderella story going for them right now. They won by 1 point in their first round over New Mexico State, and then they've just been throttling teams since then. They beat Kansas by 14, North Carolina by 17. Then they beat Kentucky by a modest 6. This team has caught fire. And that game, the UVA-Auburn game, looks like it's going to be the better of the 2 Final Four games. Over to the West bracket, Texas Tech, and here's a short piece of audio, the final piece of audio for you guys. But earlier, we had our good calls. How about this for a bad call by me? And here's what I thought about the West region and Texas Tech. Lastly, over to the West bracket, this region, in my opinion, is the most up for grabs, right? We talked about the East being disproportionately stacked. This one is disproportionately weak. I'm not buying Texas Tech as a number 3. That's a bad call there.
I would say it's kind of the weakest even still of all of the divisions of the bracket this year, though.
Oh, well, that's not the bad call. The bad call is me not buying Texas Tech at 3.
Yeah.
I thought Texas Tech was going to get beat in the Sweet 16. If not, they could have been bounced by Buffalo. But Texas Tech is a team a little bit not better than Auburn, but they've been destroying teams. A 15-point victory in the first round for Texas Tech, a 20-point win over Buffalo in the second, 19-point win over Michigan. My team, who I had in the Final Four, they beat them by 19 points in the Sweet 16 and then 6 over Gonzaga. Just like Auburn, they are killing people. They are playing very cohesive basketball as well. And the Red Raiders, yes, aided by a very easy path. Buffalo pretty weak. Michigan pretty solid, but maybe the weakest number 2. And Gonzaga for sure the weakest number 1. Right? The reason I had Michigan to the Final Four wasn't because I liked Michigan, but because I saw that entire bracket and I saw that route was incredibly easy or easier for a team to handle. I wasn't buying Gonzaga and I wasn't buying really Texas Tech. And so I thought, okay, Florida State or Michigan really have a good shot here. And when you build the bracket the way you do, if you're the committee, if you build this bracket so bad, you're going to get a bad team every time. Texas Tech is not a bad team. But Texas Tech to the Final Four, that doesn't quite ring a good bell. That doesn't quite satisfy the deepest levels of college basketball fandom. The Final Four should be Duke, Michigan State, Virginia, Auburn. Right? The committee should have flipped Michigan and Michigan State. Michigan to the East bracket, Michigan State to the West. And if Michigan State was down in the West, they would have beat Kentucky in the Sweet 16, or excuse me, Texas Tech in the Sweet 16. Then they would have beat Gonzaga in the Elite Eight. Duke, Michigan State, Virginia, Auburn, that should be your Final Four. Duke, Michigan State in the Elite Eight, that was a Final Four caliber game. That's what it looks like when two number ones face each other. If you want to talk about the mistakes the committee made, look no further than right there. That game, that very fun game to watch, should have been a Final Four game. It was an Elite Eight game. Duke should still be in this thing. Duke's run had no business being as tough as it was. Duke should not have played Michigan State until the Final Four. And now we have a very interesting Final Four. Texas Tech has a great chance to beat Michigan State. And Auburn has a great chance to beat Virginia. And if the final is Texas Tech Auburn, that's got to be like the worst, most displeasing final that we've had in a long, long time. Just two random teams, two Power 5 teams that had very strange seasons but got super hot. A Texas Tech Auburn final would be very strange to the eyes of college basketball. And that's not what I think is going to happen. I think it's going to be Michigan State, Virginia. I think this tournament is going to sort itself out a little bit. But at the very end, these four teams deserve it. These routes are some easy, some hard, all very exciting. And just like with every single year, the madness has happened, and I'm very pleased with March Madness this year. Coming up next, we're talking a pair of Russell W's. Stay with us. It's The Cast.